Oh, style is substance. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm looking for a new apartment, and I think I found one. So,
Nice. That's awesome.
how are you doing, Zach?
I'm
Or
doing
my cult
okay.
boyfriend, your cult boyfriend?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. Well, I'm not gonna lie, my monastery got raided the other day, so it's just been me and this crazy girl just trying to live life and do the best that we can. Just small people in this big God-filled world, you know.
Yeah. Um. So Andrei
Basically,
Rublev.
yeah. Andrei Rublev, 1966. Andrei Tarkovsky film. Um, well, just a little preamble. For years, I've been asked to not specifically do Andrei Rublev, but people like my Stalker and Solaris and some of my other Tarkovsky videos. They've been asking for a while to do like another Tarkovsky. So and it's been years since I've done Tarkovsky, and it's gonna be years and years more until I do Tarkovsky.
I
So, live it up. This is it.
Sometimes when I talk to fans, I ask them what their favorite ones of my videos are, and many of them say my stalker video, which I would consider my worst one, or at least among my worst. But I mean, I don't know. People like Tarkovsky. People like insight about Tarkovsky. I just think that I may not necessarily be the best person for it. I guess, even though Stalker is one of my favorite films, but Andrei Rublev also is one of my favorite films. I think from as far as like 1960s go, this is probably like among the best, if not the best. Well, we have like 2001, some other ones, his competition. But at any
It's
rate, like
nice.
as far
It,
as um,
I don't endorse that, by the way. It,
you
I,
don't
it
endorse
wouldn't make
what?
it wouldn't make a top 30 from my best of the 60s. No way.
Really? It probably
No
makes
way.
my top 30 for best films. But after seeing it again, I will say this, and we'll get into praise before long, but to start off with some criticisms, um, it's not so much the film, it's more so me that's kind of changed a bit.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I can't say I connected to it as much as I did the first time, because this is the second time I saw this. And I walked away with some different insights, if that makes sense. I'm still processing it because I just watched it about like 2 hours ago. So what about you? What's your journey with this film specifically?
Um, this one specifically, I was really afraid. One of the reasons I hadn't done Tarkovsky in a while, or like a Bergman is another big one, or even an Antonioni, people ask me to do stuff on. Oh man, I don't know. When I was younger, I think I took myself more seriously, and I liked all the like really like self-serious films, like Tarkovsky's movies, and I was afraid to watch Andrei Rublev again because I can't fucking do it. I can't do most of this stuff. Uh, okay, but Tarkovsky in general is on the level with someone like Terrence Malick or Martin Scorsese or Ingmar Bergman, and the idea that they make really eloquent and elegant arguments or films about God or about faith. Ones that are really interesting, that aren't naive and aren't passe, because that's a criticism I levy against most films with a faith message. I call it passe. I call it naive,
Like
but I would
irrelevant.
never use that with Tarkovsky. Uh, these are really sophisticated. It's a sophisticated way of handling faith, really. It's the best thing I can say about Tarkovsky, which isn't something that I'm interested in at all, like anymore. But Andrei Rublev is cool because it offers like a couple different ways. Like you could view it, the artist, as an emblematic of religion's place in society, or you can actually just hyper literally view it as the artist's place in a God-filled world. Like you can still there's still some leeway with it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm making sense or not. I
I
honestly.
think you're making sense, and I think what I'm seeing with a lot of Tarkovsky's films is it's somewhat well. I think Bergman's filmography is kind of like showcases his decline in faith, and then eventually kind of like move into like agnostic atheism. I think
And
for
by
Tarkovsky,
proxy of that, like Bergman's work, by proxy of what you just said, is more varied. Like
yeah,
there are moments of levity, there are moments of eroticism. There is
mm,
stuff in Bergman's stuff that isn't in the purity of Tarkovsky. It
yeah.
just
So I
seems
was
so
about to
pure.
say that. So while Bergman, his filmography is like his decline in faith, I think um, Tarkovsky's filmography is kind of like society, culture's kind of like decline in faith, and then kind of like trying to affirm like faith within like a gradual, more secularized world. And in many ways, I think like Tarkovsky is responding to basically the Soviet Union, kind of that suppression of religion
Oh
under
yeah.
communism. And I think that that really kind of like I mean this film took a while before it got released, and I think for a reason.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. Uh,
and
Ru-
he
Russia
had a
was in
film, I think it was
political
in like,
upheaval.
was that
Russia was in political upheaval during the time that this film was released. I think they
right?
released it at like one film festival, and then it wasn't until 1970 that I think it was released in other countries, something like that. Suppression of this film was pretty wild.
Yeah, 1971. It was
Okay,
a
so I was
a
close.
censored version was released in the Soviet Union. Um, and there were a couple different cuts of this film, and one of them is called The Passion of Andrei, which is longer than Andrei Rublev. And that one, um, while Tarkovsky prefers the shorter one, just Andrei Rublev, I think I prefer the Passion of Andrei a bit more. I think that by cutting out the violence, and I think cutting down the sexuality too, I could be wrong about that. Um, I think it kind of does the film a slight disservice. You know, his argument was that like I think that it's better just to make it quick and sudden. But I disagree. I think that if you actually like really let you know the viewer like observe the violence and kind of like soak it in, which is weird because considering I thought that he was all about kind of like embellishing in the moment, and that's kind of why I think that he should have. That's why I think I prefer the longer cut personally. Um, but yeah,
I,
but
I will never see the longer cut because this normal cut is over 3 hours long and made me want to die. So
well, and that's kind of the thing though. I think that like this film, like I think it is quite pessimistic for a film that's also
yeah,
about like the affirmation of faith. And the thing is, I don't really know what to make of that, I guess.
okay.
Um,
Let
like
me just say, because this far into the analysis, it seems like I am being snarky, and I don't, and I don't like. I think Andrei Tarkovsky is a master of film. He's just someone who I appreciated a lot more when I was younger, and like ideals meant more to me.
mhm.
Idealistic filmmakers meant more to me. But Andrei Rublev, even though I say that I just said like parts of it just made me want to die. It's because it's so pessimistic. I mean, deliberately so. But there are some of the most. I think this is the most quintessential Tarkovsky film out there. I feel like this best encapsulates and distills the director at his most Tarkovsky-esque. And a part of that are the deliberately long takes of just like a very earthy kind of elemental depression. A very kind. This is very much so the quintessential Tarkovsky film.
It's
There,
like the observation of kind of like God's world and man's place within nature, or humans'
Mhm.
place within nature, right? That's kind of the
Yeah,
idea.
kind
Um,
of. But this is also a film where I don't think he makes nature look very beautiful, as opposed to like the beginning of Solaris. I think nature
yeah,
looks pretty lovely.
that. See, that's kind of why I may not agree with it being kind of the indicative of like everything that's Tarkovsky, because maybe in terms of faith, it's the most explicit about faith. But as far as like his actual like aesthetic, I'd maybe go with Mirror, like Stalker, I think. Even
I don't
Sacrifice for
think
that matter.
so. Um, because I'm thinking that his message is actually a lot more pessimistic than his later films that lead on, which are also still pretty pessimistic. But I think it's like cosmically pessimist, except for the idea of God. but it's not like the idea of God is by any means a satisfying, or God is not a comforting thing, and neither is the earth really. Um, Neither are people. The most
Yeah,
serious question that this film poses is posed probably in the scene where it actually displays its philosophy, or at least states it very clearly, where he sees the ghost of, I believe, Theophanes is his name. I'm not saying it correctly, but the Greek painter who was painting in Russia, who trained Rublev, and he's talking to his ghost, and they pretty like I like viewing it the way you do, as a film that was reflective of the political climate in Russia at the time and creating art under oppression, that sort of thing. I think that's really interesting. But then the part of the film, the only part that I think has like an analytical argumentative value is when Theophanes looks at one of the icons that Andrei painted and goes, but it's so beautiful. So is Tarkovsky saying, and this is like the better question, like is Tarkovsky saying a multitude of things, like is art better under oppression because it's more, because it suffers more, or is he saying that just simply or like the artist's place in society is to make beautiful things of terrible situations, or like to bring God back into it, like the serving God will always shine through in a bright way, like that's where it gets interesting to me personally. Like Tarkovsky could be saying something so pessimistic that art flourishes under oppression. Like that's wild.
I don't know if that's necessarily his like main argument, but I think it's definitely something that's interesting to ask. Like does yeah, because in some ways it's like you know, especially within like like within societies that are kind of like messed up, like the government, whatever, at least like according to like his perceptions of kind of the Soviet Union, like basically it's like, does that kind of make art better? And in some ways, I think that it's saying yes, sort of.
Yeah,
I think so
but
because
you
I think
see
it's
the ending
it's
that's a
basically saying
celebration.
the world is cruel, right? And it's art that kind of makes us like come closer to God, I think is what it's sort of saying, and trying to find the beauty within the world, within God's world. But the world itself is kind of corrupted by by Satan. And like earlier on in the film, like I think Andrei is tempted by sin throughout. You even see him kind of like staring at like a serpent in the water, right? And then later, there's the pagan woman, you know, that's like in the woods, and like cover her private parts. It's almost like, hey, that's like kind of this Eve like character. And so I do think Andrei is tempted throughout, and probably in part of the corruption of the world is kind of seeing like his temptations and thinking, wow, this looks wild and this looks like fun, and what I would rather be anywhere but here. But at the same time, it's like, no, I need to like, preserve my faith. I need to commit to my religion, commit to my God, and not let others get in my way. But then eventually, like, it comes to a point where you know, he feels that he has sinned by killing the guy that tried raping the girl. And he starts like, devoting his life to silence, giving up on art in some ways. So it's kind of like there's a disconnect between him and God. God may forgive him, but he shouldn't forgive himself. It's kind of what Theo Vance was saying. And I find that kind of like whole like moral like dilemma there sort of interesting, because the idea is like you shouldn't kill, but like what if it's within the defense of others? Um,
I think asceticism wouldn't allow for it.
yeah, I think
Clearly,
that's kind of the idea.
but
Is that
I think the artistic argument is stronger than the religious one here. Uh, it might even take precedent over God at parts, because I mean the film does end with Andrei breaking his vow of silence to console a weeping bellcaster, played by the kid from Ivan's childhood.
yeah.
wonderfully, wonderfully. By the way, it's a really gripping performance. But he's consoling him and says, like, I think the best line of the movie, which is, you cast the bells and I'll paint the icons, and then the film switches the color, and we basically kind of celebrate the iconography
Yeah,
of Andrei Rublev.
right.
Um, and the bell that the kid made was absolutely astonishing. It was wild. And he made that under, like, almost under threat of execution. Like, so I honestly think that Andre is saying that some of the most beautiful art is made in the most oppressive states. Because I don't honestly believe he's saying that the world is always cruel. I, I think he's saying it's uniquely cruel because of, like, how
Well,
much
that's
focus we're given to the raiders and stuff.
that's kind of an interesting that's an interesting observation there, because the bell is like this beautiful piece, and it's like, but it's like it's oppression that kind of drove that, and it kind of reminds me of kind of, like all like these like monumental like you know think about like the Great Pyramids and stuff, right?
Yeah,
Like, and then like these like incredible works of art and architecture that were built off of slave labor. And on one hand, it's like, maybe we shouldn't celebrate that because of the means of production. At the same time, maybe we should also celebrate it because like this is the work that they put into it. But maybe we should look at it from a perspective of not, who ordered it, but instead like who the artist that made it, if that makes sense.
right.
And I think that in many ways, what this film is doing is I think it's very metatextual also, right? Because like because of the conditions of the Soviet Union, at least as Andrei Tarkovsky saw it, not only was kind of like people's like interest being suppressed, in 1979, like he even had a film destroyed because it had to be abandoned because they said, hey, no, you can't criticize the Soviet Union, you can't like promote religion, right? And this is kind of as religious as he could get probably throughout his whole career, before the before sacrifice, at least, which he made outside of Russia. Um, and in many ways, I think it's like, you know, the text exists because at least like according to a lot of people look at this as kind of like this is like a masterpiece, right? And as a masterpiece, it's at the surface of kind of like fulfilling a more higher spiritual power. And at the same time, like Tarkovsky in that case is playing the artist. He is kind of like stepping in the shoes of the other Andre, right?
Yeah,
Through this film, right?
yeah. Well,
And
he actually, like, he had to, like, fabricate. He had to make up so many parts of Rublev's life because we really don't have too much information on him. So, like, if by remembering the artist by inventing him, like, is that also remembering? Yeah.
what's about like it's kind of like creating a new kind of like because I mean like I haven't looked into like his life too much, like, so maybe
You
it's
know,
like,
the Wikipedia page is this big for
and
Andrei
it's
Rublev.
and for the movie it's a lot longer,
Yes,
isn't it?
it's so big. Yeah.
I'm sure
Perused it.
there's some studies on him, but it's just that like I do think that probably some of it's quite fabricated and some of it's like uh but that's kind of like the act of like creation, right? Like he's trying
Mhm.
to like honor not only God, but also kind of Christians and kind of like Christian history. And I think Andrei Rublev is like, hey, maybe we should like kind of like look at this artist and see like what that says about the human
Well,
condition.
I do feel that Tarkovsky believes in, like, the idiom or the idea that existence justifies creation. So if, like, the greatest existence possible is God, then God simply existing justifies any creation made in tribute to him or any sacrifice made in tribute to him. Um, but especially works of art because he himself is an
So,
artist. Yeah.
but I kind of want to think about. So, what does it mean then, from your understanding? Like, what does it mean for Andrei Rublev to give up on art, right? When he takes the vow of silence. Like,
Well, I mean, I feel like he's punishing himself, but in a sense, he's
right, because he's punishing himself because he's meant with like, oh, like maybe I did the wrong thing, even though like at least in the contemporary climate, I think most people would say you did the right thing.
yeah. But I think the more interesting question is if the icons that he paints are really tributes the to holiness, then like is he also punishing that which is holy by depriving
Yeah,
the world of his
that
talent?
that's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm kind of wondering, where it's like, hey, God gave him this gift and to honor God, but now he's kind of like at like this like kind of
Yeah,
crossroad where it's like he is, because he's like, first he makes a moral judgment based off of morals outside of kind of his religious dogma, and as a result he kind of is now suffering while also basically kind of like punishing himself, right? He's punishing himself through his own suffering, but also it's like he's sort of like, isn't that someone defying God, like like not like
in a
using the
way,
gifts
but
that he
like
gave him?
the whole narrative of the Bellcaster story is like a return to the fold. Really, he it's a really cathartic experience for him to watch the Bellcaster um, put put so much of himself and his faith into casting the bell. I mean, at the end where he breaks the vow of silence, that I'll paint the icons. I feel like that's a return to God.
And then bam, you saw the icons, right? Because it's like,
Exactly.
but maybe that's part of it also, because like art is not completely like completely, it's not completely just kind of like a subjective experience. It can be shared in some ways, and maybe it's like it's not until he saw it, until he made that connection with this kid, that he really understood his own place as an artist. And in
Yeah.
some ways Andrei Tarkovsky is doing that with Andrei Rublev. Makes sense
Mhm.
in some ways, where
Yeah.
it's like, where do I go from here? Because like, I mean, this is his second feature film after being a student. Ivan's Childhood, in some ways, is good, but in some ways, it's also, so you can see he really evolved from that film to this film, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. And in some ways, it's like this is like kind of like his statement in a way, like where like as an artist, and is he going to make a films for like is he going to make films like for his for himself or for God? And I think he kind of ended up choosing God. And by proxy of that, it's also for the world, right? At least those that will engage, right?
Yeah.
Just
And
like, yeah.
I was just a quick thing, like maybe like art under oppression is too limited because it could be because the monastic way of life is repression as well, and I don't and like works of because it's a celebration of the art of God at the end,
Right.
and might even say like art in tribute of God or for God is also made under repression of certain things as well, under oppression, under like he doesn't. It's so pessimistic. I can't think of his movies featuring any like Christian ideas of philosophy being optimistic at all.
Well, in a lot of ways, I think it is pessimistic, and but it's also kind of like enduring the suffering because you have faith in God is kind of what it is. And in some ways, it
But
kind
there's
of,
no point though.
in some ways, it sort of reminds me of it's been a while, but I think it sort of reminds me of Kierkegaard in a way, where he's kind of like, oh no, God is like, we have to fear him,
Yeah,
because it's based off of the belief that he is, real, not based off of kind of like the best way to like, I mean, it is that too, but basically it's not trying to like, seek spirituality, but more so just trying to like, seek the truth, and under the assumption that, Jehovah God is real, right? And
yeah,
in some ways, it's like Andrei Rublev sort of like judges like, the women in of like that are practicing like paganism, but it's like they are practicing their own religion. On what grounds does his morals really relate to them? And it's like, and in some ways he is tempted by it, right?
hmm
And I think that, but he's suffering in that moment too. I mean, like, I guess one could make an argument that, she kind of like makes a move on him and he doesn't want it.
uh,
But the thing is, he does want it though.
and
That's
the
the
film
idea.
sympathizes entirely with that particular pagan woman. We follow her
Mhm.
escaping certain death by swimming across a vast body of water, and Andrei is so shameful that he has to look away. Like, so Tarkovsky has his sophistication, but
Right. He's,
um,
but I'm thinking he's framing it more as like a kind of a suffering within faith, within religion, within culture. Um,
I'm also think that like he's pessimistically saying that their faith is even more powerful because of the penalties that they face.
maybe, but then it's like,
Because like on like the whole thing about a monastic monk, about a monk is that they are so dedicated to their faith that it's almost not necessarily awe-inspiring, but
there's an
um,
integrity there
there's a deep integrity there to the
where
sacrifices that people like Rublev made.
it's admirable in a way because like wow they're really like committing themselves to that, and even honestly, and then his vow of silence for so long, like that is its own commitment, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of follows that kind of, he practices like what he learned, but at some point it's like, once you're used to something, you're used to it, right? And that's kind of becomes your way of life until you know something else. And I think the idea with the kind of the paganism, it's like maybe there is something else out there, but I have to stick to my own, right?
Mhm.
I don't know. I don't. I don't know exactly what Tarkovsky is saying with that, but I think he's at least like kind of bringing to the table like, hey, no, this is something that people like. Is sex entirely bad, right? Um, you know,
Well, I mean, I was thinking of Tarkovsky. He's not a particularly erotic filmmaker. I think Solaris is my favorite film, and that's easily his most erotic film.
it's
He
also
definitely
the one
thought,
that he
yeah.
says. It's also the one that he says is his worst.
Yeah, well, that's his fucking problem and not mine. Like, Solaris is great, mostly because Natalia Bondarchuk is amazing in that film, and Tarkovsky certainly thought so when he filmed it. It's not a particularly
I,
erotic filmmaker. I would even liken him to the stylings of a monk in a way. That's kind of why I think Andrei Rublev is so quintessentially Rublev, because I think there is a certain amount of repression with his films because they seem so free floating, they seem so meditative and ruminative, but at the same time, it doesn't express the whole of the human condition, and yet I think naively it suspects that it does.
well, I think it's well, I think in some ways it does, in some ways it doesn't. If that, paradoxically speaking, because I think it kind of like hints at other aspects of the human condition that Christianity, at least at the time, did not account for
Yeah,
on the
but if you're gonna make
peripheral.
a film in the 60s, fucking account for it, bro. Like, you dive into
No,
it
I
then.
think he does. I think he accounts for it, but he
Yeah, but
reserves
we
it to the
can't figure out what
peripheral.
he's saying about it. He's obviously not saying it very clearly.
Well, I would say that the pagan women, I mean, you say it's not sexual. I think like I wouldn't say it's like, in any kind of like horny kind of way, but I think I think in some ways he has those women. He does frame them as beautiful and like, whoa, what is this? It's also chaotic. Andrei Rublev, like, we get things from his point of view where it's like, yeah, that you shouldn't be like resist lust, resist, all that. But at the same time, it's like it's not really making, how do I say this? Maybe it's just I don't know, this is just the flaw with like um you know his like religious sect, or if it's just a flaw with Andrei Tarkovsky, or if it's not even a flaw but it's just kind of what he's actually consciously trying to go for. But it's like it doesn't really make it doesn't really make a case against giving into that temptation, if that makes sense,
Right.
which is
No, it
clearly
does make
there.
sense. But I think that that's also what would eat up Rublev too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in many ways maybe that's what eats up Tarkovsky, but maybe that's also why he kind of like tries to refrain from it, and maybe that's why it's shot in a way where it's like, is it not
But even
objectifying, or
then, like, I don't know if that's an erotic impulse more than like an experiential one, because Andres lives such a fucking sheltered life. Like, just the not even sometimes eroticism is separate from just the quality of experience. 'Cause Andre hasn't experienced much. I, I just don't think Tarkovsky is particularly erotic. That scene,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean, like
there is a
I
bit.
mean, I agree overall, yeah.
There is one bit that I feel like is really cool where he sees a girl through some trees and she starts to approach him, but then she's pulled back by someone else. And I think that's the most erotic this film gets because you
Right,
don't
because
expect
it's like,
it.
oh, I want her. But I mean, like he's obviously I mean, I think that stuff is kind of the really interesting parts of that film, even regardless of how erotic it is or isn't.
Wait, I don't need
It's
it to be like erotic. I just need it if it's going to take 3.5 hours to engage with the human condition in such a small way. I mean, I'd like it to be a larger
but
scope.
that's how it is for a lot of like kind of like people that are like in his position, where it's like they have to like commit, to a life of like celibate, or at least like you know, like right, because like either you are celibate and you kind of like honor God as a monk, or you're not a monk and you honor God like through marriage, right? But either way, you can't like give into like premarital sex, kind of the idea,
Yeah, but
especially with somebody of
Andre
another
does.
religion.
Andre jumps the gun on the argument so much. Like you must honor God, even if the God in Andrei Rublev is not particularly honorable. Like
Mhm.
he's a monk because clearly he's a monk. Like that's not.
So you would say that the film doesn't really give you a reason to love God.
I'm not looking for a reason to love God. I'm looking for a reason why Andre would.
I think a big part of it is what he knows, as in like it's what he it's his life that he's living, and he's living for God, and it's like basically all he knows. And anything in peripheral, it's like it's enchanting, but it's also something that should be cast out, right? And that's kind of how he sees it.
The more we talk about it, the more I don't like this movie.
You
So
know, it's I disagree. I think this movie is great. At the same time,
I think it is like okay. I think it is good. I think it's a good movie. I just don't think I like Tarkovsky anymore. I started this by saying that I wasn't gonna call him naive because he can't be,
I
but
think
maybe
he's
he fucking is.
sophisticated. He's
No, maybe he is.
sophisticated. But I think there's like it is an interesting kind of like because he and like Bergman like loved each other so much, and at least their work at least, and I think that there is something interesting about that, because I think Tarkovsky, they are kind of coming at it from different perspectives. Bergman
Hmm.
loves his women.
Yeah. I mean, I don't need a film to be so deeply erotic. I just need some
Yeah.
sliver or
Oh,
like
you want your religious films to be like horny? Not every film is like Ken Russell's The Devils,
I
but
mean, the Last Temptation of Christ. I don't need my
that's a
I don't need my
blasphemous film
religious
according
films
to
to
some
be
people.
horny.
Yeah.
I just need a film that seems so devoted to the visceral, like earthy texture of nature itself to be as devoted in the human nature.
But in some ways it's kind of, but it is about the human nature, though. It's about kind of how like collective groups like will turn against each other. It's about how like it's about kind of like how like we are tempted by things from the outside, things we don't understand. It's about kind of like God's relationship with us, and how he is silent. It's just not really, it's not always explicit about it, but that's what it is about. And in some ways, people are trying to reach God through their inventions, through their art. In the beginning, there's that guy with that hot air balloon. Goes up, he starts flying, and it's like you get that point of view, like kind of like a bird, but then it comes crashing down, because God's basically saying, nope, I don't think so.
Yeah,
You
but
can't
that had a
reach. It's
cool
like,
Icarus feel. Well, then I think that Tarski should reject and rebel against his stupid god. Like nothing good happens in this movie to anybody. Why tribute him? If he's silent, then he's also not listening.
I think maybe Stalker makes a better case.
Yes, Stalker makes a much better case.
I think so. Um, but I think it's like just exploring a different kind of like area of how like Christians engage with God. Um,
Yeah.
but it's basically
It's
I
just
do,
like this film is more unforgiving in it. Like,
yeah. I mean, it's Andrei Rublev.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a very enjoyable thing to actually watch. Not that films should always be enjoyable, but fuck.
I think it's enjoyable. The cinematography is too good not to enjoy it.
Really?
Yeah.
Sometimes the cinematography is straight up dog. Like straight up sucks, dude. I hate it.
No,
I hate
no,
it
it
so much.
doesn't. It's great. It's like consistently
Sometimes it's
great.
just not good though.
What are you
Sometimes
talking
it's
about?
like sometimes it's beyond good.
I,
And then
I
that's
think I think watching it again though, I will say this though. I kind of for a while this actually was maybe like my second favorite film. It's not quite that high, but I do quite like it a lot. But I will say that I thought that this was kind of like, I don't think he quite has everything there, honestly, just yet.
I'm
I
afraid
think
to watch Stalker again because I just don't think I like Tarkovsky. I think his
Tarkovsky is
philosophy.
great. Tarkovsky
I
is one
think
of the
his
best filmmakers.
philosophy
In the comments, if you got made it this far through the video,
they're there still. They hate me for what I'm saying,
yeah,
but whatever.
like let me know who you think is right here about
I think Tarkovsky's philosophy is stupid and probably shouldn't be shared. I don't see value in it. This,
I don't know about that. It's
no, you
finally
can't. No, you can't agree with that. That's not a good thing to say ever.
no. So basically it's like this. Religion is used to find order, to find kind of meaning, to find like happiness and to guide yourself in life and kind of like build like a moral structure around. The film kind of also frames it as a source of agony, a
Yeah,
source of pain, a source of suffering, and they'd be better without it.
like so, so
I mean, not
miserable.
exactly. I'm kind of exaggerating to
No,
some extent.
exactly. Nailed it. You nailed it. Couldn't agree more.
And also, it's like, oh, this guy was about to rape and kill this woman, and I killed him. I feel bad about it. No, you shouldn't. You're the hero. Don't live in silence.
And then Tarkovsky's like that girl that you saved, she's gonna abandon you for like the same kind of raiders in 25 minutes. She's just gonna like spit in your face and humiliate you in front in public and just leave with the enemy. Because Tarkovsky just loves humans.
Yeah, and it's like, so somebody's trying to get closer to God, and according to this film, I'm not saying that this is how God is, but according to this film, when people try to reach God, He will strike them down, rain upon them, give them no reason to honor Him.
From the beginning with that Icarus shit, just swatting him down.
And like,
I mean, this is like heretical. This is blasphemy. This is like cinephile blasphemy right here.
It's like literal blasphemy, right? Like, I mean,
Well,
like,
yeah, but
hey,
also
this is what Tarkovsky's saying with this film, whether he realizes it or not, right? I mean, I'm
yes,
of the
and I
impression
don't
this is a
think
masterpiece. It's a masterpiece, but at the same time, it's like,
yeah.
oh, should I
Yeah,
feel
I will
bad?
still say
Should
it's
I feel bad for
masterful.
saving somebody during a raid?
Yeah, I just think that like Tarkovsky's ideas are not good, and I don't like them.